Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We're really excited to have you with us. And so as we wait for everyone to join, please take a moment to say hello, introduce yourself in the chat, and maybe share where you're joining in from. Before we start, a few housekeeping notes. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comments section. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A section on the right. This will help us adjust them more efficiently. And if you're tuning in from LinkedIn, feel free to drop your comments there, and I'll make sure to include them in our Q&A. Lastly, the session is being recorded, and we will send you the recording to your email after the webinar. And if you can go to the next slide, Conor. So in today's webinar, we'll explore how 2025 is shaping up to be a defining year for GenAI as it shifts from revolution into reckoning. We'll dive into 5 key trends driving this change, covering the rise of AI agents, the challenges of measuring ROI, and the increasing need for governance and differentiation. With insights from industry data and real-world examples, you'll gain practical strategies to avoid the commodity trap, embrace systemic AI, and build applications that drive real business value. So we're really thrilled to have our speakers today, our very own field CDOs, Conor Jensen, Stephanie Griffiths, Gernot Klein, and Catalina Herrera. They'll be guiding us through today's session and sharing their insights. So without further ado, let's get started. Conor, Stephanie, Gernot, and Catalina, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Renata. And welcome again, everybody. I'm Conor Jensen. I lead the field CDO team here at Dataiku. We're very excited to have this conversation here with you today. And I'll let everybody else sort of do quick introductions as they come up to present. But to just give you a little bit of a flavor of what we're going to go through here today, we're going to go through sort of 3 sections. The first one, before we dive into the 5 trends themselves, we're going to look at a little bit of sort of the macro environment that's surrounding the situation right now, the things that are not just AI that are sort of driving us to this moment where we are. Then we'll dive into the 5 trends that we really see being some of the defining factors for how AI will shape and materialize over this upcoming year here of 2025. And then finally, we'll take a good chunk of time for a discussion amongst the 4 of us, answer any questions that you've put into the chat. And very excited. So thanks again for joining, everybody. And let's dive in. So one of the first and sort of most obvious trends, but still worth sort of talking about here, is just how different the technology landscape is at this current moment compared to a year ago, compared to 2 years ago, the actors who are influencing, how quickly that's changing. And this is, I've been in tech now for nearly a decade. I was in data science and industry buying technology before, so I've been on both sides of this fence for a long time. The pace of change here is unprecedented, right? And this is not just this is new technology, but not just the LLMs, not just the generative AI, but all the associated architectural components of it, how people are using all of that. The pace of change here really, really is unbelievable. I remember trying to wrap my head around all of the sort of data science vendors that were existing 15 years ago, and who was doing what from a Hadoop perspective and a cloud perspective, and that was hard. And I think it was generously a 1/10 of the size of the sort of number of people that we hear coming out right now. And so this is really changing the dynamic, not just from the volume, but the pace at which new companies are coming, how they're addressing things, and of course, not to ignore how much is coming from an AI perspective from existing companies as well, right? So this isn't just the brand new actors. It is new technology, new features coming from companies that we are already associated with. Additionally, that's primarily thinking about it from the vendor perspective, but open source is not to be dismissed in this world. Open source has long been a very strong driver of machine learning and data science technology. The vast majority of the things that we still use today, especially from an ML perspective, are on the backs of open source things like scikit-learn and other frameworks like pandas that help us do this. And while the last couple of years of generative AI have been primarily driven by the large scale commercial solutions, or OpenAI in their not-for-profit commercial. I'm not entirely sure what they are anymore, but this is a different sort of space right now than we've seen, but you can't not bet on open source. There are so many institutions, so many people that are really committed to building things there, that this is an area that, and as we've seen over this last weekend with the enormous surge of DeepSeek, the existing LLM architecture built on top of the neural networks isn't the only way to solve this. We've seen other things like Grok, and there are other ideas about this coming. So we'll be very curious to see how open source comes in and really does impact these different vended solutions that we're talking about. Gernot, over to you for a little bit.
Hello, thank you. Thanks, Conor. Just very quickly to myself, I'm a field CDO here in Central and Northern Europe. I used to be a data scientist a long time ago, before then moving and helping companies going through digital transformations. And I then led data science and data teams in an online learning platform before joining Dataiku. So the point here I would like to talk about is guardrails. And guardrails is getting, in my opinion, more and more important, because it's been this area that's been lacking a little bit behind the development of the large LLMs and the large foundation models. And it's now becoming more and more important because, as you will see later, people are thinking more about the safety, the safeguarding, and also the governance aspect. But as systems are getting more and more powerful and we're moving more towards this agentic AI or potentially agentic AI era or phase, obviously this concept of having a human in the loop is not going to vanish, but it obviously is going to hit limits very, very quickly. So you need systems that are as automated and as fast and as real time as the interacting with a large language model. And that's what these guardrails really are promising now to bring to the market. So you have large language models checking other large language models. You still have a lot of rule-based systems as well. So these old classic rule-based checking systems are not going to vanish immediately, because obviously if you have one large language model which is probabilistic, checking another one which is probabilistic, it gets safer, but it's not 100% safe. It's not deterministic. But this kind of guardrails, companies, and also the consumer who wants to know that he can trust the system, are going to get more and more important in order to scale AI, in order to scale GenAI deployments in large organizations. I think that's the main point I want to bring here.
Awesome. Thank you, Gernot.
Thank you, Gernot. So, hi everyone. I'm Stephanie Griffiths, field CDO in Southern Europe, and my background is digital transformation. I also studied philosophy, which makes me quite optimistic that I won't be replaced by AI. 4 drivers of change I want to share with you today. Building on what Gernot said, the first driver of change is reputation. And behind reputation, I have a little guessing game for you. Could you use a chat and tell me who is the unexpected champion of AI governance in the near future? There is a little hint with a picture. The Cannes Lions, which is a festival of advertising. Maybe that will help you to guess. Try. I'm checking at the chat. Does anyone want to have a guess? 1, 2, 3. Okay. The next unexpected champion of AI governance is going to be your chief marketing officer. Why? Because he needs to look after the reputation of his brand. And tech can have an influence on that. And the chief marketing officer is very worried. So that's one key factor of change. Marketing used to think about AI as a little tool on the corner for productivity maybe, but now marketing is going to be sticking with it and looking at you. A second driver of change, if you can go to the next slide, Conor, is interdisciplinarity. We all know data science is highly collaborative. But what is very interesting is the consequence of all of that. We're going to see universities completely rebranding themselves and recreating new programs. Very interesting to see what's happening in France at the moment. You have the best engineering school partnering up with the best humanities school, creating a new university. Why? Because mathematicians and data scientists cannot work alone. They are working hugely with linguistic experts, but we need more than that. So interdisciplinarity is a key driver of change, which is going to explain the transformation of GenAI. A third driver of change, Conor, completely different. Here we're moving to energy, and what is happening is totally fascinating. We all know AI is boosting energy demand. Yet, when NVIDIA is launching a new chip, well, they don't communicate about the energy impact. Thanks God, we have some programs now which are going to help us to assess energy score of AI algorithm. But it does raise a question. We still consider energy as a commodity. So countries which are producing more energy could potentially be the owner of AI. Let's look at the Stargate program. What if we were thinking about energy as a technology? Completely different mindset. AI, in that case, can be a driver of innovation in renewables. We have also a lot of innovation with quantum computing, which on one side is consuming energy, but on one side, the promise is actually it will decrease the consumption. So let's think about the geopolitics behind AI, and let's try to switch our mind to energy as a technology to see the impact on GenAI. Next driver of change, let's keep up with the electricity metaphor. It was fascinating to see that when electricity first appeared, people were a bit disappointed because it wasn't changing so much things in industries and in manufacturing. Why? Because we try to put new within old processes. Instead, we should have started to think about new working methodologies and reorganize working patterns around this innovation. That's exactly what is happening right now. We are trying to do old things with something completely new, such as AI, GenAI. Now, it will be very interesting to hear in our new GenAI trends what's going to help us to move further. Please, I need another field CDO coming in to help us to understand what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Stephanie. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a sense for everybody, as we think about the things that we're hearing from our customers. These are those bigger like drivers out in the market that are really driving us. The energy one, I think, is a really interesting one to me. Gernot and I were meeting with a customer last summer who talked about their actual biggest issue at that point in time with LLMs who were doing everything locally was not hardware, but actually getting enough energy to run their things on a regular basis. And there was a very interesting sort of thing to hear for me. It wasn't on my radar at all, but when you look at some of the top performing companies in the US last year from a sort of market perspective, it wasn't just NVIDIA, it was also energy companies who are seeing huge demand. So there's some interesting dynamics here at play. So let's transition then into looked at these sort of like broader themes, obviously all of which are tangential to AI. And so how do we think that will manifest then this year in how AI will change in that? And so to kick us off with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catalina.
Thank you, Conor. And just a quick introduction. Yes, my name is Catalina Herrera. I've been with Dataiku for almost 4 years. I'm an electronic engineer by trade. I have 3 different master degrees in different engineering fields, and I have been in every single position from the behind the scenes, the data analyst, the data scientist, whoever is trying to make sense out of this data persona for the last 20 years. And I will say it's fascinating to see this change in the ecosystem and to see how we are actually landing in a place where we are seeing commoditization and what that means for us. So I'm going to use an analogy. I'm going to follow the example from Stephanie. I'm going to use another analogy. We're going to think about AI as coffee. So everybody loves coffee. I'm Colombian. I love very good coffee. But not all coffee is the same. What's different? Well, a few years ago, when AI was new, it was like discovering premium coffee for the first time. It was rare, it was unique, it was available only to those who could afford it. And having access to one of these models felt like a competitive advantage itself. Well, guess what? Things are changing and changing very quickly. So now LLMs are everywhere. It's like instant coffee. So we have all of these players in the ecosystem offering LLM and LLM models to anyone that can use it. They are cheaper, they are easy to get, and they are good enough for general purposes. So this is the commoditization of AI. It's becoming a widely available instant coffee that doesn't stand out. Why is this a problem? Well, look at the visualizations we have in that slide. Look at the top visualization over there where the blue line is pretty much on top of the green line. And if you are the blue line and if your competitor is the green line, what is the problem? Well, if your enterprise only uses these ready-made AI solutions without customizing them, your risk is becoming just like everybody else. There is not a unique flavor to it. Yet it's not your secret sauce into what you are developing in terms of AI. So how are you going to set yourself apart for your competitor? Take a look at the below visualization where that AI differentiation gap is actually bigger. So that is when you think about coffee, where a unique blend of it. You are going to offer a unique blend of it, and that is your competitive advantage. So it's not everybody in the industry using the same generic AI solutions, but it's you adding your differentiator to it. It's you adding your unique blend to that coffee that you are opening for the first time. So if you move to the next slide, Conor, we can think about a solution as creating your signature of AI blend, bringing your flavor to these pipelines and to these deployments, and trying to avoid the risk of producing something that is not different enough from your competitors, right? So the enterprise needs to customize this AI and train the models on their unique data. And this is where the flavor and that domain expertise is part of these solutions. It's not the same just to have a generic model that does something very generic versus something that actually matters to you and matters to your business. And that is the differentiated AI that needs to be part of these flows. How are you going to add your secret sauce to it, and how you're going to maximize that economic impact for that data solution that you are bringing to the table from the enterprise size. No? So it's a trend either. The trend is that we have to be different from our competitor, understand how this can become a commodity, and find that sweet spot where you can actually empower that domain expert to interrogate this data, to make the most out of it, to still use all of this advantage that generative AI brings to the table, that is actually accelerating all of this time to value, but in a way where you are injecting your secret sauce and differentiate yourself from whatever else is going on in the market. And then if we go to what else is going on in the industry and what other trend do we see out there, well, guess what? We need to start showing some value out of this. There are more and more CDOs out there that are in risk because whatever that have been producing is not showing value. How are you going to tie this to so what? How am I going to show that this is actually producing something good for somebody? So there is no ROAI or nothing, meaning I need to ensure that whatever I am producing is moving a needle. And I'm going to use another analogy while I explain this visualization that we are seeing here. We're going to think about AI like building a smart kitchen, all right? So imagine you want to upgrade your kitchen to be super high tech, and you're going to have a smart fridge, a robotic arm to cook, and then you're going to have AI suggesting which meals are you going to consume. And you invested a lot of money in all of these super fancy gadgets, expecting it's actually going to work and it's going to save you a lot of time and you're going to be improving your meals and you're going to make your life easier. Well, guess what happened? Not so easy. Not so easy. You don't have a clear plan. You bought all these gadgets, but you didn't think about, oh, that's not going to work all together. This robot arm, for example, doesn't fit this stuff. And the AI meal planner suggested a recipe that I don't like. And my team is not trained to use the robotic arm. And no one in the house knows how to use these gadgets. And the robotic arm just sits there because everybody is intimidated by it. And then you don't have the right ingredients, and the fridge is filled of stuff that you don't like. And then you have a pretty much unfunctional set of gadgets that are not actually maximizing your opportunity. So when we think about this in the field, and when we think about applying this into the enterprise using of AI, you're going to see a very similar situation. You're going to invest on all of these platforms, new toys, ecosystem, hardware, software, and then you are not going to have a clear AI strategy. Many companies are investing in AI because it is trendy, but they don't actually define how it is going to align with their business goals. There is not a clear path into how that AI project is going to end up solving a problem that we actually care about and not just randomly producing artifacts that are not going towards operationalization. You are going to face that skills gap where the teams are not trained to develop and manage AI efficiently. And you are going to have bad or incomplete data that at the end, garbage in, garbage out. So you are still struggling with these silos and with this lack of scaling and this lack of operationalization strategy and vision that are actually causing the ROAI being something very hard to measure and being something very hard to show. So if you go to the next slide, Conor, I will say that the one thing that we have been learning and one trend that we see today is like, hey, we need to connect this better. And we're going to start this project thinking from the beginning which one is the needle that we're going to move, which one is the use case that we are focusing, and how we're going to ensure that we show value out of what we are working together towards achieving together. So it is not just about investing in AI tools, it's about building the right process to integrate AI into your business, ensuring that you are smoothly connecting your people, your technology, and your processes, but with a framework where not only you say that you need to collaborate, but you can actually collaborate, where you can communicate and collaborate with a very diverse group of people, where you can actually measure success, where you can actually measure the impact that you are generating into these data and AI related outcomes. And I will say that's a trend that we see today in the field, because you will be forced to quantify the ROI from GenAI. And that's something that we see. What else do we see out there, Gernot?
Thanks, Catalina. So one of the other things we see out there is what is nicely described here as the LLM mass. And that goes back to 2 points. One that Catalina just raised in terms of enterprises or users are they want their own flavor. And it's also, there's a message in the chat from Nikita asking, well, who's actually responsible for that? Is it, oops, I think we lost the slides. Maybe not, hope we can still see the slide. So the question around who's responsible for these different flavors that Catalina referred to. And what we're seeing is that companies are actively now, as companies coming out of this experimentation phase where they said, oh, let's just try something out with GenAI, and they used one, typically one of the first players who was out there, one LLM model. They're now experimenting with different models, right? They use different models to, as we learned earlier, to check the output of some models, but they also feel like, well, one model is better used or is better to be used for some applications. For some applications, a very small model might be good enough. So there are very different approaches to using large language models now, in corporations now. And what that results into, of course, is that similar like with the classic AI models, where you could very easily check different models and see which one performs best. Is it logistic regression? Is it a random forest? Or is it an XGM boost model? We see similar developments now in the large language model space. And what that means for organizations is that they need a way of easily and in a consistent manner change large language models in their applications without having to do much rework, right? You don't want to take an application that is in production, either internally in your organization or customer facing. You don't want to massively rework that application every time you want to change a model. And the reasons why you might want to change models is obviously pricing. You might find there's a model out there that is much cheaper to use for various reasons. It could be regulations. You might have a model that is regulatory compliant in one area or in one region, but not in the other. So you need to change it depending on where you want to deploy that model. And those are different reasons why companies want to not just stick with one vendor or one model, but be able to play around, try out different models and see which ones works best. So, and what we can see here on the slide is really, which is really interesting, I wouldn't have expected those numbers to be that high, is that really only a small, tiny amount of companies, 2% of those who got surveyed, are really only using one model, while all the others, 44%, using to check each other or to get better output. 30% are using one, but often other models as well. So a large part of the organization are already in the situation where they use different large language models in order to improve their output. So bottom line here is really, and I'll come to just before governance, you need, or companies need this gateway. They need a really easy way of switching models and providers without having to change much else in their code or in their setup for the different applications. If you go to the next slide. Governance. So that's always a little bit of this unloved child, similar like data governance or data cataloging, but it's immensely important. And as we can see on these numbers here, it's also top of mind for executives. And it's becoming more and more important as well, because we obviously seen ROAI in the European Union regulation is now in place. It's highly likely that regulation will follow in other regions as well. So how do you make sure you are not only compliant with the regulations in your specific area where you start off with, but then potentially also in different regions of the world where you might do business or want to do business? And that requires a governance framework surrounding or embedding the whole AI and GenAI development cycle. And that is something, again, where we see companies slowly waking up to, and the numbers here are really interesting because there seems to be this discrepancy between the executive side who seem to be really worrying already a lot about it, while on the more technical or IT and data executive side, it doesn't seem to be their most worrying point yet. So you could see that either being optimistic that they have it already under control and they just haven't communicated that well, or they're actually still focused on much more technical questions, trying to get GenAI into the organization, making it work, and the governance aspect isn't yet top of their mind. So different ways of looking at these numbers. But the main point here is that what we often hear in organizations is that there's often this mindset of, well, let's get the use case out first, let's get it done, and then we worry about governance. And that is a big mistake, in my opinion, because the reason, or the problem is that it's obviously that trying to create this transparency that you need to be regulatory compliant, to have this solid framework in place, is nearly impossible to do afterwards. You need to do it during the development cycle. You need to be able to capture easily the information, what you do with the data, why did you do these different transformations, and then also around the model side, what kind of models are you using, how have you adjusted them, how have you fine-tuned them if you're that far ahead. And all of this needs to be captured during the development cycle. And you then also need a framework where you can easily and immediately see what models are you actually using where in an organization. Because traditionally what happened, someone built a little model and it got useful, and then people started using it in an organization. That was great and it was very useful. If you use a GenAI model, you're obviously very quickly in a very risky environment because you have to then comply to certain regulations. And if you don't know exactly which model is used where, that could be a real risk factor for an organization going forward. And while we are now really at this starting out, companies are embracing it more and more. Once you move into this more agentic version of AI or in this phase, it will obviously become absolutely paramount to have this in place, because once you have more and more agents running, more and more systems running automatically, you need this governance framework. You will never be able to rebuild it afterwards. And I think this is one of the key trends. You need to get this governance in place, and people are rightfully worried about it at this time in point. Thank you.
To describe our last trend, I would like to start with a question to make sure you are working too during that webinar. If GenAI is boosting efficiency, what are you going to do with this efficiency? Try to think in your daily work. If you are winning so much time, are you going to do more of the same? Or are you going to do things differently? 10 days ago, it was all over the papers that Goldman Sachs CEO was explaining that it used to take 6 persons, during 2 weeks for a draft to prepare an IPO. That's a lot of people in a long time. Through using generative AI, it was reduced by 95%. Okay, so Goldman Sachs know how to use GenAI. But the key question is, if we think that the modern banking's DNA is just at 5%, why do we need banks? No, really. So we need to really think hard about what we are going to do with that efficiency. If we move to the next slide, the trend is all about those who resist are the first one who are going to lose a job. And they are not the one we think about. We always think people who are not qualified are losing their job. Well. I think we need to turn around those thoughts. We believe that the first one who might lose his job to AI is actually the CEO. Because CEO who are not able to maximize that new efficiency and rethink way of working with AI are not going to be really innovative and productive. 3 types of things we can act on. First, really think hard about in which way you need to think your working processes. Data doesn't belong to the data team. Everybody needs to collaborate. Business people need to collaborate with data. Don't tell us that AI being very risky, we're not going to use it now. We have AI governance processes, guardrail, it's already there. And really, you all have, and particularly the C-level, an obligation of curiosity. And what is behind curiosity? Don't take anything for granted. Let's make sure that everyone knows how to use data. That doesn't mean using Excel. It means asking the right question. It means having time to be creative. So if we move to the next slide, I would say we don't all need to become data scientists. Absolutely not. Stop all those boot camps. But we need to reinvent AI literacy. You need to have a program for everyone to explain and kill the hype on AI, to give example of what it can do. And that's the only way to reduce cultural friction between the AI natives and AI abstainers. With every innovation, there is some resistance. It's completely normal. It comes from ignorance. What we're doing at Dataiku is having workshop for everyone who wants to understand AI. And that education is really key because everybody needs to brainstorm about what those tools mean for their daily work. And only business expert can work it out. It's all beautiful to have data scientists and data team to tell you how you need to use data, but only you, a business expert, understanding what is AI, GenAI, and the agent will be able to fight the commoditization. So it's up to you. Be curious to shape AI.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you, everybody. Very, very compelling and interesting points so far. So let's transition into now and really start to discuss some of these points. We have a number of questions that have come in through the chat and through the Q&A place. So best part about moderating this is I get to ask the first question, I get to pick it. So it's actually one that I want to come through is when we look at this sort of pace of change and everything, and especially some of the things we talked about with OpenAI, with DeepSeek, with open source versus vended and everything, do you guys see a big shift towards away from the vended LLMs? And do you think that we'll really end up in this world where we have a handful of large-scale transformers or models that are hosted by these big companies that everybody builds on top of? Or do you think companies are going to end up using things that they're building and training and doing themselves? Gernot, I'll throw it to you first, but I really want to hear what you think.
So it's a really interesting question, and I think what the latest development with DeepSeek has shown is that you can build smaller models or easier available and cheaper models that can still outperform or at least do the same work. So I think it's probably a bit of both, bit of what you asked. So I do believe that while there will be a place for these large language models or these large foundation models, which are basically trained on as much data as possible, and that kind of set potentially the benchmark, you will see a lot more smaller models which potentially benefit from these, but these smaller models will be tailored more to specific needs or specific use cases in organizations, and which will then also allow organizations to fine-tune, this next step, not just use a method or implementation to customize them, but potentially go the next step and fine-tune these models much easier with less cost in order to customize them as much as possible in order to get this famous, own flavor that Catalina referred to earlier. So I think there's a place for these large language models, but I don't believe they are the only ones going to, rule the corporate world. I think this development of smaller models that can be fine-tuned is a niche that will develop further and further and will become more and more important.
Yeah, I'll second that. I will say that totally depends on the use case and also the vertical. There are different use cases that require a little more in terms of security and all of that, and the deployment has to be slightly different. But I think like everything, find your own balance. No, there are a lot of very generic LLMs that are extremely useful for use cases like accelerating time to value for developers, creating an SQL query to help this other person access that specific data, or very generic ones that are very usable in terms of what you can accomplish with them. So I think it's a balance between what is it that you are trying to accomplish, again, what is the use case, and yes, I do believe that in some cases that's going to be a way more convenient deployment when you train
That's
them.
why it's going to be key not to be married with one model and to have the flexibility to switch between different models. So you need to make sure whichever platform, data platform, AI platform you are working with, you can, as Catalina said, choose the right model for the right level of perfection, the right use case. Don't be married, compare, and what's going to change is the ability to evaluate, of course, the cost of using specific model, but also their energy consumption. That's coming very fast.
Yeah, I think that actually that last piece, especially around the energy consumption, there's a question in the comments that I think relates to that. I'm going to read it specifically so that I get it. Was looking at DeepSeek, and which costs about $6 million to train, as sort of what has been said. Like, what does that say about the ROI for the big companies who invested billions in compute? And I'll start there. For me, that's really interesting because there's the training aspect and there's the inference aspect. And that's one of the things that really has been a big shift as we look at leveraging language models and generative AI stuff, is that there's just as much effort on the actual like usage and the inference side as there is on the training. And so certainly the trainings are, these, especially like the big, huge, GPT-4 and 4o and things like that, like are, have these huge things, but there's so much effort and compute and energy that still goes into the actual leveraging of those and the inference side of things, that I really still believe that the advances in chips coming out of NVIDIA and others, and the investment in having that compute available is probably what's going to make a difference for people to really be able to use this stuff at scale. Because especially when we look at some of the first customers that I remember working with where, they had productionalized things from an LLM perspective, where once you start looking at, running not a few hundred queries a day or a few thousand queries a day, but 10,000 queries a day, 100,000 queries a day, 1 million queries a day. The cost of that, especially from a token perspective, when you're leveraging public APIs, grows to the point where having an ROI on that is very tricky. We'll come back to ROI here in a second, but that the efficiency of compute using these smaller models, but the availability of compute is what's going to be the difference for companies to really, or one, I think a lot of it comes back to then also, comments around your own data and your own secret sauce and stuff. But I think that having the compute available, having the energy available, and having hybrid architectures where you own some of that compute, I actually do think will be a differentiator for some people going forward. But I'm curious to hear everybody else's thoughts on that too.
To build on what you said, Conor, I think it's also interesting to realize that the transformer architecture itself is going to evolve. And at the moment, it is very inefficient the way we are transforming the input and output. But that's going to change too. So we will see big models consuming less memory, less GPU, and they will become more efficient too. So the world is moving to less energy consumption. It's compulsory. Also because we don't want, it has a huge geopolitical impact. And if we remain in that world of huge energy, then we remain under the domination of a few countries. And it is so important that AI remain diverse. We can't have LLM only in English, otherwise we only think in one way.
Agree. And I also think that that's already happening. I think DeepSeek is an example of it. And we are changing the architecture, the behind the scenes, and making these models super efficient and super good with less consumption. So we are already seeing that in the market.
Well, so shifting a little bit here, one of the questions from the Q&A section that has a lot of upvotes for it, which I think is good to dig into, is around the ROI. So what specific metrics should we be thinking about collecting to get any sort of ROI from our generative AI investments? I know, Catalina, you did the trend around the ROI. Would love to hear your thoughts there.
Yeah, I will say that it's identifying that needle that you're going to move from the beginning. And I do have some key metrics that are good examples of what we see going on in the enterprise. That's actually an outcome of a good pipeline where we are optimizing the way that we are using the data. Cost saving, for example, something operational efficiency, something that used to cost my developer team do in a week. Now they can do it in a couple of hours. That's a good example. Cost savings from the, by the way, now I have a new data outcome product as part of my portfolio that is actually helping predictive use case, but we didn't have it before because it was purely descriptive. The revenue growth, when you start thinking about how you are actually tracking customer satisfaction and everything. So if you think about every single business unit within the enterprise is going to have a subset of KPIs that ultimately are connecting with some silo at some part of the infrastructure where you can actually start aligning on which one is the needle that you are going to move. Okay, with this use case, we are targeting an operational efficiency of X. And all the time that we were investing on doing the same, the wheel every morning, like concatenate the 3 tables, create the clean table, and populate that dashboard, all of that is a micro automation job. So those are key metrics that we can actually connect from the beginning and start showing. This used to take us a week. Now it's taking us 2 hours. Those are measurable metrics that you can connect to ROAI.
To build on what
really interesting.
To build on what Catalina has just said, the use case value should also be, we should rethink about what is value, okay? Of course, there is the economic value that Catalina spoke about, increased revenue, cost saving, but in link with what we heard, energy and multidisciplinarity, etc., social value. Are you improving customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction? Are you increasing security with anticipated maintenance in your factory? So the social value of your use case can also be a very interesting type of value and KPI. And the environmental value, of course. Are you reducing CO2 emissions? So the use case value should be thought about in terms of economic, social, and environmental. And then you have the overall platform value. Whichever tool you are using will increase speed and agility, will increase stack efficiency, and will increase control and brand reputation also under your value is an interesting one. And sorry, Gernot, I interrupted you.
No, not at all, not at all. There's one point I wanted to add, and it also actually came up in the chat somewhere. It's this concept which I really like because I worked or looked at data science use cases in procurement a lot. And in procurement, quite a long time ago, there was this concept of total cost of usage. Right? That suddenly was the main important driver, and it is a really important driver. And I think it doesn't help you directly to say which KPI do you need to look at, but this concept of saying, okay, what is the total cost of employing or deploying a generative AI solution is often not really fully understood or purposefully ignored a little bit, right? And as Conor said, the cost for inference, you can estimate it, you can get very good values from the providers. So I don't think there's an excuse not to really go down to this further levels and say, okay, what are the total costs? Not just see how much development time do I need, how much does a data scientist cost, and so on, but really trying to what are the other cost drivers for whatever GenAI use case you're trying to deploy, and what are the value of the revenue drivers. Or as Stephanie said, maybe it's not economic, but there are other value drivers for you and your company. But just taking this mindset, you need to look at the total cost of usage. The total cost of deploying such a solution is getting more and more important because companies coming out of this experimentation phase, and that was great, and they tried GenAI for all kinds of use cases. I think there needs to be a bit of realization that GenAI is great, but it's great for very specific areas. And that, I think, needs to be taken into account.
No, thank you. So following along the lines of sort of like, how are we capturing value out of this? A really interesting question that came in comments is around not the enterprise space, which is, to be fair, a lot of sort of like what we've talked about so far and where I think a lot of people's assumptions go. So what will happen around the small and medium business and enterprises where they don't have as much, they don't have IT teams, they don't have the resources, they don't necessarily have the bandwidth. And as somebody pointed out in the chat, right, that's 90% of the global economy is those small businesses. So what do you think that the impacts, because as of yet, I haven't heard a lot about how generative AI is taking shape in the small and medium enterprise space. So yeah, curious to hear your thoughts about how this will manifest there and whether or not this will be beneficial or harmful to them.
I think I see a very interesting trend with those small, middle-size business, and is the non-usual suspects maximizing the use of the generative AI to actually accelerate time to value. And what I mean by that is that these are the teams that are really using the generic ChatGPTs and stuff like that, but empowering people that was not empowered by AI before. So for example, human resources teams, marketing teams. So they are actually using this kind to generate visual, to generate a presentation, to write a better email, to all of these little things that actually are accelerators in terms of the time to value, but that at the same time do not require a lot of fine-tuning, tweaking, deploying my own model. No, I can actually use it as is, and it is tremendous value for this kind of use cases. So back to that, depends on the use cases and depends of the actual vertical, but I do see a lot of these smaller, medium-sized companies using this kind of generative AI for this kind of tasks.
I fully agree. I find two things very interesting. If you are a small, medium-sized company and you do code, it's fantastic to have generative AI documenting your code automatically. Because if you have a few people doing the code, if someone is out sick or whatever, you have everything auto-documented. And that's very, very interesting for small-sized companies. And the second thing is allowing everyone to speak to data and speak with data. That's a completely novelty. And at Dataiku, we do the Dataiku answer. So we enable companies to do their own small chatbots. Making the most of your own data in your context and getting it across the company is a complete game changer. And that's the basics for starting to use AI.
I don't think I have much new to add to that. I think the main point I would just also emphasize is it's really, especially for small or medium-sized business, the prioritization of the use cases they want to work on. I think it's much more important than potentially for a really large organization that can afford to play around with different use cases and see which works and which doesn't. I think there's a lot of pre-work required to see, okay, which are really the use cases and which technology is it really GenAI for that use case that can help me to bring some value into the organization. So I think it's much more use case, very focused, use case driven, or it needs to be much more use case driven than potentially just saying, oh, let's bring GenAI in and we will find some value that it feels some of the large organizations are taking or have taken at least. I think that's what I would just add there.
I think that the last thing I'd add on the sort of small medium business is the advantage that a smaller medium business has is that it is focused, right? It doesn't have massive diverse lines of business and products and all of that sort of stuff, right? They tend to be much more intimately associated with the products they're offering, the services they're offering, and their customer base. And so identifying the problems that can move the needle for them as a business is a much more immediate and I think clear thing for them to do. The gap that then comes to be able to say, is this a business problem that can be solved with analytics or AI? And that's where there's, I think, opportunity for probably services and products that make that an easier sort of clear, hey, if you're suffering from this business problem, these are the ways you can use generative AI to solve that. I think that there's a lot of space there where they don't need data science teams. They don't need to hire that. But I think that there are, sort of data science as a service type of products that will come in that space to sort of help that. All right, so moving on, and there's actually sort of I'm going to take two questions and sort of combine them here together. And so one of them is talking about what recommendations do we have for non-technical team members and management to learn about what AI can do for the organization. Some of that I think goes back to what I was just saying a little bit, but paired with that, how do we see the role and maturity of HR and the people and culture functions in shaping this change for educating the company about how to use AI?
I think prompt. Like this is a time where if you are not experimenting with it, that train is leaving. And this is the time where we need to be actually interacting with this technology and really evaluating what is it for me from that domain expertise. So I will say just, if you are not experimenting with it, this is the moment where you need to know what it means for you and how it can actually complement or augment your use case within that domain.
Yeah, experimenting is totally key. So for instance, next week, I'm meeting with our design team because I'm working on AI and creativity, and I want them to tell me how they are already using AI, and we will have a brainstorm on how more they can do with it. So they are experimenting themselves, and then we're discussing it to see how we can maybe increase it and share it with the rest of the company. And it's happening within our own company. And that's what I think everybody should be doing, experimenting, sharing, and getting feedback from everyone.
I think maybe just to add on to that, I wouldn't be intimidated, to be honest, by the technicality of that topic, especially, non-technical team members. If you think about, how do you generate value employing AI, ideally you start on the business side. So I think people, even if they say, I don't really understand AI, they shouldn't be intimidated at all. They should think about, okay, what are my biggest problems right now? And if it's a problem that seems like, oh, well, that could be automated, or there could be something to be, then go and speak with a technical person. I mean, don't say, oh, I don't understand AI. The last thing you really want to do is saying, oh, I need to understand AI really in detail before addressing your business problems. It's the other way around. So sometimes I even think the less technical knowledge you have could actually be a benefit, at least initially, because you find, as Conor said, also, especially in smaller companies, you're so much more focused. You know where the business has problems. You know how you could change something potentially, and then you just need to work with more technically minded people in putting that and see whether AI can do that for you. But I think the key is still the business understanding and really understanding where the problems in your business and what are the processes, what processes are not working, and that. So bottom line is I wouldn't be intimidated as a non-technical team member addressing and working now with AI.
The thing that I would add is that a lot of this of how do we effectively use AI really comes down to using our own critical reasoning and our understanding of our domain, of our business, to evaluate the output of the AI. Like the worst thing you can do is take the output of any model, right, whether it's sort of a generative AI or more traditional machine learning, and just take it at face value as being perfectly correct without questioning it, right? It's all behind the scenes. It's still probability. There's still, room for error, and all of this, things like hallucination and all of that sort of coming to the fore, obviously in the generative AI space. Like these are all the things that you need to be looking at that answer and asking yourself, does this answer feel right to me? Where could it be wrong? How do I validate the output of that answer myself, or by leveraging, especially setting up, things like LLM as a judge or other sort of metric things to help you understand those. But I think that this is also an area of opportunity for sort of the development side of LLMs and generative AI technology to think about like the UI and the interfaces to help somebody understand how to use it better, and to prompt where somebody should use critical thought, critical reasoning. Hey, maybe the LLM is less certain in this part of the response than in a different part of the response or other areas. So, all right, well, I think we've got just a couple of minutes left. And so I'm actually going to say, I'm sure that there's no way we'd manage to get through one more question in 3 minutes and we just go over. So thanking everybody for all of the time that you've spent with us here this morning, this afternoon, this whatever time it is, wherever you've joined from. I saw people come in from all over. So thank you so much for coming. Let me turn it over to Renata to just close out the webinar here.
Yeah, so a big thank you to all of our field CDOs, Conor, Catalina, Gernot, and Stephanie, for leading such an engaging session. And of course, to all of you for participating and all of your thoughtful questions. While we weren't able to cover all of your questions, we truly appreciate your engagement. As mentioned earlier, the webinar recording and presentation slides will be sent to your email. For those of you who haven't seen our full report yet, here is our QR code that will direct you to it. And if you miss it, don't worry, we'll include it in our follow-up email as well. And the next slide, please, Conor. We look forward to seeing you at future events. And speaking of what's next, our upcoming webinar on March 10th will be all about AI agents, one of the hottest topics for the year ahead. And so stay tuned on our socials for more details on this. Other than that, thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great day, everybody.